The true measure of a person is not how they ascend in times of comfort, but how they discard what once grounded them in pursuit of illusion. What happens when the woman you dismissed, the one you called boring, unmotivated, and a burden dragging you down, ends up living a life you can only fantasize about? Ryan Callahan thought he had it all. A high-rise office in downtown Seattle, a seven-figure salary, and a glamorous new wife who looked perfect on paper. He had tossed aside his longtime partner, his college sweetheart, Jenna Rivers, convinced he'd traded up in every way imaginable. Their paths would cross one final time at a corporate gala, what Ryan believed was the crowning moment of his professional life. Until he realized that the soft-spoken man beside Jenna wasn't just her date. He was the sole proprietor of the entire corporation Ryan had poured his career into. And the revenge about to unfold wouldn't be loud or theatrical, but quiet, merciless, and absolutely ruinous. This is the story of how a man who thought he stood at the summit was toppled by the memory of a life he tossed away so casually. The air inside the sleek million-dollar high-rise felt dry and lifeless. Much like the conversation, Ryan Callahan adjusted the cuffs of his custom Ermenegildo Zegna shirt, the sharp fabric at odds with the fraying remains of his 15-year relationship with Jenna. "This just isn't working anymore, Jen." His voice was detached, rehearsed, almost indifferent. He wouldn't meet her eyes, choosing instead to stare out at the glittering skyline beyond the floor-to-ceiling windows. This view, this condo, this life, he believed he had earned every inch of it. And Jenna, standing there in faded jeans and a plain navy t-shirt, didn't fit the picture anymore. Jenna clutched her lukewarm coffee mug, fingers tight around the ceramic. Her chest was heavy with disbelief and cold grief. 15 years, Ryan. That's not something you just throw away like it's some broken appliance. You don't get to decide this isn't working. "Don't be dramatic," he scoffed, finally turning toward her. His eyes swept her form, no makeup, her hair tied back in a basic knot, not a brand label in sight. She felt the judgment in his gaze. "We're heading in different directions. I've got plans, ambition. I'm this close to becoming senior managing director at Western Horizon Capital. I need someone who fits into that world." The words he didn't say rang loud between them. Someone who isn't you, who complements that, someone who thrives in that environment. The words he didn't say sat heavy in the space between them. Someone who isn't you. Jenna had once been a rising name in the museum world, a sharp-minded curator with an eye for stories buried in brushstrokes. Her exhibitions had turned heads, her reviews glowed. But as Ryan's finance career rocketed into late nights, high-stakes travel, and endless networking dinners, Jenna had slowly stepped back. The assumption had always been unspoken. He would climb, and she would keep the ground steady. She had managed everything else: the apartment, their calendar, the social obligations. She made the world predictable so he could chase chaos. She believed they were building something together. But to Ryan, it was now obvious. This had never been a partnership. It had been a phase that had outlived its usefulness. It hit her in waves, the realization that love had quietly mutated into convenience, that every time she stayed up late waiting for him, every RSVP she filled out alone, every professional milestone she passed up wasn't a sacrifice to him. It was background noise, an afterthought. "So all those dinner parties," she said, her voice barely steady. "The nights I spent alone, the museum job I let go of, that was me holding you back?" He shrugged, waving a hand like he was swatting away a fly. "We were kids when we met, Jen. We've outgrown each other. My life is moving forward. Yours, it's just..." Paused. He didn't say failed. He didn't have to. "You like your books, your routines, your quiet little world. And there's nothing wrong with that," he added quickly, the way one adds a spoonful of sugar to soften a bitter dose. "But it's not what I need." That cut the deepest. She had spent years curating calm from chaos, believing that being his anchor was noble. And now that steadiness, the very thing that made her who she was, had become ammunition in a breakup speech. He didn't just want out. He wanted to rewrite the narrative, casting her as the footnote to his ascent. He had taken the small joys she carved out for herself, the steady, content pieces of a life, and turned them into evidence of her inadequacy. The divorce moved fast, clean, clinical. Ryan's lawyers were surgical in the way they divided the life they'd shared. He played the part of the magnanimous ex, assuring friends he'd been fair. He let her have the old savings account from their 20s and a portion of the proceeds from their first home sale. What he kept was worth millions more: the downtown condo, the investment portfolio, the art collection she had curated over the years. Those he claimed as his, the product of his labor. Not hers. Not theirs. His. As if her contributions were invisible, erased with a line item and a signature. On Jenna's final day in the condo, she was sealing the last of her belongings into boxes when Ryan walked in with his fiancée, Vanessa. Vanessa looked like she'd been algorithmically generated to accompany a millionaire to galas. Tall, platinum blonde, teeth too perfect to be real. Her white sheath dress clung to her like it was sewn on, probably worth more than Jenna's car. She moved through the apartment like she already owned it, her gaze skating over Jenna without acknowledgement. "Ryan, darling," she purred. "Are you sure we're keeping this piece? The colors are a little dull." She gestured toward a painting Jenna had found during a summer gallery tour in Portland. A lesser-known mid-century artist, one whose work she loved fiercely. Ryan laughed, a sound that made Jenna's stomach tighten. "Whatever you want, babe. We'll start fresh, whole new vibe." She was pointing at a painting by a little-known post-war expressionist, something Jenna had discovered years ago and held on to like a lifeline. It represented the last fragile piece of a life she had built. Ryan chuckled, the sound slicing through her like a dull blade. "Whatever you want, babe. We'll redo everything. Clean slate." Jenna froze mid-movement, a box of books pressed against her chest. She looked at Ryan, the man she'd loved since she was 19, and saw only a stranger. The soft humor in his eyes, the boyish grin that once made her heart flip, it was all gone. Replaced with something hollow and metallic. He didn't even see her. His face was a mask of polished indifference. The laughter that once drew her in now grated against her skin. The man she had once built her future around stood there, rewriting the past like it had never mattered. That painting wasn't just decor, it was memory, history, her story. And to see it reduced to a drab accessory crushed something fragile inside her. She didn't say a word. Just turned, walked through the condo door for the last time, and didn't look back. As the elevator descended, she caught a glimpse of herself in the mirrored doors. Tired, hollowed out. The woman Ryan had labeled static and ambitionless stared back at her. And for a terrifying second, she believed him. Her new place was small. A second-floor walk-up in a quirky part of Tacoma, full of indie bookstores and chipped sidewalks. There was no concierge, no valet, no skyline view, just her. The first few months bled together in a fog of quiet sorrow. The silence was the most jarring part. No rushing to iron suits, no answering last-minute dinner party invites, no managing someone else's chaos, just the echo of her own breath. Some nights she cried over microwaved soup. Some mornings she watched the sun crawl across the wall and wondered how long she'd been staring. The pain wasn't loud, it whispered, it lingered. It turned ordinary things into reminders. The empty half of the closet, the silent phone, the echo of her name spoken only by herself. She unpacked the cardboard boxes, unwrapping not just things but versions of herself long buried. Her college notebooks on visual theory, exhibition catalogs from galleries she once helped curate. It felt like digging through an archaeological site of a forgotten life. Then, one rainy Tuesday, she found herself staring at the bare white wall above her tiny couch. And something sparked. Not a wildfire, a flicker. But it was hers. She wanted beauty again, not the staged kind Ryan preferred, but the beauty she knew how to find, the kind she used to chase with real passion. She took the divorce settlement, not a fortune but enough, and made a choice. She wouldn't be static. She would start again, with herself. From her kitchen table, she launched a one-woman art consultancy, Rivers & Co. Her first few clients came from old connections, professors, former co-workers, distant classmates who remembered her eye. It started slow, helping new homeowners choose their first prints, tracking down originals for small collectors. The projects were modest, but each email, each appointment, each thank you was a tiny balm. For the first time in years, her worth wasn't measured by someone else's ambition. It was built in brushstrokes and choices she made for herself. No multi-million-dollar deals, no red carpet galas, but every tiny success felt like a stone in the foundation of something real, something she owned. She didn't keep tabs on Ryan, but completely avoiding his life was impossible. He was everywhere in the city. The lifestyle magazines, the society pages, Ryan Callahan arm in arm with Vanessa Drake, their smiles polished, outfits flawless. Finance titan Ryan Callahan and heiress Vanessa Drake dazzle at the Evergreen Opera benefit. Power couple turns heads at Seattle Children's Ball. They were the perfect image of elite success, and every glossy feature only seemed to confirm that he had made the right choice. He had upgraded. He had won. And Jenna? She was barely a footnote in a story he had stopped telling. But as she hung the final piece of artwork in a client's home, a vivid, joyful abstract that lit up the entire space, she felt something no tabloid photo could ever capture. She was creating something real, something that belonged entirely to her. And she was only just beginning. Julius Thorne moved through life like vapor, present, powerful, but almost never seen. He was one of those rare individuals whose fortune ran so deep, so embedded in the foundation of global wealth, it granted him the only true luxury left in the world: invisibility. He owned freight lines, aerospace ventures, biotech startups, a constellation of commercial properties, and several private equity firms, one of which, tucked away in the back of his holdings, was a decent mid-tier operation he barely remembered called Western Horizon Capital. His name wasn't emblazoned on skyscrapers. He didn't do press. His parent company, Thorne Strategic Group, was referenced in whispers inside top-floor boardrooms, but to the average person, it didn't exist. Where he did invest his name, his attention, his presence, was in art, not for clout, not for return, but for silence. In the wordless exchange between observer and canvas, Julius found clarity, stillness. In a world flooded with billion-dollar noise, art quieted everything. He first heard of Jenna Rivers over lunch at an exhibition preview. His companion that day was a museum director whom he had supported for years, quietly, generously. "There's someone you need to know," she said, swirling her wine. "Jenna Rivers. She was one of my most gifted students back in the day. Disappeared into a marriage, but she's resurfaced, works independently now. She doesn't just recognize great work. She reads it like a novel, finds the pulse behind the brushstroke. She's got that rare kind of eye." The word stories caught Julius's attention. He was tired of gallerists who only spoke in numbers, auction results, potential appreciation, market trends. He asked the director to arrange a quiet, informal introduction. The first time Jenna met Julius, it was in a quiet, indie coffee shop tucked into the edge of Capitol Hill, equidistant between her apartment and what she later learned was his discreet, unmarked office building. She had expected someone pompous, older, sharp around the edges. Instead, the man who rose to greet her was the opposite, mid to late 40s, kind eyes, intelligent and slightly tired. He wore a slate-gray cashmere sweater and dark jeans. His whole presence radiated calm, an energy so opposite from Ryan's constant, buzzing drive. "Miss Rivers," he said, voice smooth and steady. "Julius Thorne. Thank you for meeting me." "Please," she replied with a smile, "call me Jenna." Their conversation didn't revolve around money. He didn't ask her rates or credentials. Instead, he asked what moved her, what era of art made her feel most alive, which painters she thought the world had unfairly forgotten. Jenna found herself talking for an hour, her words tumbling over each other with an excitement she hadn't felt in years. She spoke of Northern Renaissance symmetry, of Vermeer's grace, of Turner's storms and shadows. She spoke with her hands. She barely paused for breath. There was a lightness in her voice she hadn't heard in herself for so long. It startled her, like rediscovering a melody you used to hum in another life. Her mind danced through brushstrokes and palettes, old textbooks, and the memory of oil paint on her fingers. And he listened, really listened. He didn't interrupt, didn't glance at his phone, didn't steer the topic back to himself. When she finally caught herself, cheeks flushed from rambling, he smiled. "I'm looking for a piece," he said gently. "Something for my private library. It's a quiet room. I want the art to match that. Not silence exactly, but stillness, contemplation. Could you help me find that?" It was the most graceful, thoughtful brief she'd ever received. Their working relationship grew from there. Studio visits, artist introductions, gallery previews, long coffees that turned into longer conversations. In between the lines of their shared dialogue, Jenna felt something shifting. It wasn't romantic, yet. It was recognition, a sense of being seen not as a role or a prop, but as a whole person. Someone whose mind, not just her presence, was valued. Julius was a puzzle she loved slowly piecing together. A man clearly surrounded by wealth and yet untouched by its worst instincts. His car was a sleek electric coupe, modest by billionaire standards. His watch, tasteful but unassuming. He mentioned trips to Zurich, Dubai, Tokyo as casually as Ryan would mention a weekend in Napa. But he never said the name of his firm, never stated his title. Jenna realized she was opening up to him in ways she never had with Ryan. She told him everything. The career in academia she walked away from, how her confidence had been worn down slowly during her marriage, and the quiet, fragile sense of joy she was rediscovering as she rebuilt her life. "He told me I lacked drive," she said one afternoon, standing in front of a Rothko that pulsed with restrained intensity. "He saw my peace as laziness, as weakness." Julius didn't respond right away. His gaze remained fixed on the painting. "Contentment," he said finally, voice low and reflective, "isn't the opposite of ambition. It's the fuel for it. A man who needs chaos just to feel alive, that's a man trying to outrun himself. But someone who finds clarity in stillness, that's someone who's already won." His words settled around her, not like a verdict, but like warmth. For the first time, Jenna saw her own nature not as something lacking, but as a strength. One evening, he invited her to his home for dinner. It wasn't some sprawling estate in the hills. It was a breathtaking penthouse atop a restored historic building near Volunteer Park, an architectural gem with deep wood floors, soft amber lighting, and walls adorned by what might have been the most quietly powerful private art collection she had ever seen. A small Monet, a de Kooning study, a luminous, heart-stopping Rothenberg. "This is incredible," she whispered, awe thick in her throat. Julius gave a slight shrug. "It's just home, a quiet place." He had cooked himself, a simple linguine with herbs and lemon zest, and they ate on a narrow terrace that overlooked the lake. Below, the lights of the city shimmered like a scattered constellation. With a glass of wine in her hand, good food on her plate, and silence that didn't demand anything from her, Jenna realized she was falling in love. But it wasn't the intense, reckless love she had once known with Ryan. It was something deeper, steadier. A sense of finally arriving at a place she hadn't known she was searching for. As their relationship deepened, Jenna took over managing his entire collection, sourcing new acquisitions, overseeing restorations, building catalogs. He trusted her completely. The budgets he gave her were dizzying, yet his direction never changed. Buy what matters. Buy the stories worth telling. She never asked too many questions about his business. She knew he was the head of Thorne's Strategic Group, a private investment firm. Beyond that, it was just a name to her. The quiet engine behind the beautiful life they were building together. She had no concept of the scale, no understanding of the colossal machinery operating quietly beneath the polished surface of their tranquil life. But she didn't need to. She was in love with Julius Thorne, the man who listened, who understood the power of quiet, who didn't see her as an accessory, but as a partner. One night, they were curled up on the sofa, a soft documentary about Jean-Michel Basquiat humming in the background. Julius was reviewing something on his tablet, his brow pinched with focus. "Everything okay?" she asked, lightly tracing circles on the fabric of his sleeve. "Just a standard Q3 review," he murmured, not looking up. "One of the private equity firms we acquired a while ago. Too aggressive for my taste, but the numbers are solid." He swiped across the screen, revealing an org chart. The board's pressing for a major M&A push. Their top guy is chomping at the bit. Real shark mentality. "What's the firm called?" she asked absently, more focused on the screen than his words. "Western Horizon Capital," he said. The name hit her like a punch. The air left her lungs. Western Horizon. Ryan's company. The firm he had torn their marriage apart to serve. The place where he clawed and schemed, convinced it would make him powerful. She turned slowly, staring at Julius, this thoughtful, composed man who had become her everything, now casually referring to Ryan's entire world like it was just another ledger line. He swiped again. A string of emails popped up. One name stood out in the recipient line. Ryan Callahan. And just like that, it clicked. Julius wasn't just wealthy. He wasn't just powerful. He was Ryan's boss. Not the direct kind, the kind above that, the one you never see. The final authority, the architect behind everything, A strange calm washed over her, edged with something like nausea. The universe, apparently, had a brutal sense of irony. Ryan had spent years climbing a ladder, desperate for approval from someone he'd never met, never knowing that man was now falling asleep with his head in the lap of the woman he had tossed aside. She looked down at Julius, his features relaxed in the flicker of the TV screen. Then she thought of Ryan, puffed up with self-importance, walking the halls of Western Horizon like he owned the place. He had written himself into a drama where he was the hero. She was just the discarded prelude. But the story wasn't over, and the twist, he wouldn't see it coming. Ryan Callahan felt untouchable. He was days away from closing the deal that would define his career. For 6 months, he'd been leading a hostile acquisition campaign of a rising biotech company, Neurophage Therapeutics. The move was aggressive, brutal, ethically murky, and exactly the kind of thing that fueled him. This was the one. The kill that would finally get him. The managing director title, the 8-figure bonus, the admiration that bordered on worship. Ryan Callahan had earned it all. His life with Vanessa was exactly what he had envisioned. A non-stop carousel of black-tie galas, luxury resorts, and unapologetically lavish spending. Vanessa was the perfect ornament. Stunning, docile, her conversations rarely straying beyond her next spa treatment or whatever scandal was trending in her social circles. She mirrored his success, and he adored her for that. But sometimes, when the lights were out and silence crept in, something else stirred. He'd glance at Vanessa's immaculately contoured face as she slept beside him and feel hollow. His mind would wander to Jenna, to nights spent debating philosophy, art theory, and gallery politics until the sky began to pale. To the way her eyes lit up when she was trying to prove a point, the way passion made her glow. The thought would flicker, then fade. He would force it away. He had chosen this. He had won. One evening, he and Vanessa were dining at Magnolia, a 3-Michelin-star temple of exclusivity tucked away in the heart of downtown Seattle. Getting a table there was a symbol of power. They were celebrating what he believed was the penultimate step in the Neurophage takeover. "To us," he said, lifting his glass of 1995 Chateau Margaux, "and to my new empire." Vanessa giggled, brushing her glass against his. "I saw the most breathtaking diamond cuff at Cartier today," she cooed. "It'll go perfectly with my dress for the Western Horizon gala." But Ryan had stopped listening. Across the candlelit room, at a table set in quiet seclusion, sat a woman he almost didn't recognize. Jenna. But not the Jenna he had last seen, worn down, dimmed, packing boxes in an old apartment. No, this version glowed. She wore a deep, emerald dress that played against the warmth of her skin. Her hair fell in soft waves around her shoulders, and when she laughed, it wasn't polite or forced. It was full, unfiltered, alive. And the man beside her? Ryan's jaw tightened. He didn't know him. The man wasn't trying to be noticed. He wore a perfectly tailored suit that whispered money, not shouted it. His gaze never left Jenna. And the way she leaned into him, the comfort in her posture, it wasn't performative. It was real. Something twisted in Ryan's chest, sharp. Foreign. Jealousy. It didn't make sense. He had Vanessa. He had everything. So why did seeing his unambitious, static ex-wife shine like that feel like an attack? "Who is that?" Vanessa asked, following Ryan's gaze. "Wait, is that your ex? Oh my God, what is she wearing?" "It's no one," Ryan snapped, turning abruptly back to his plate. But the taste had vanished from his mouth. The rest of the meal passed in slow motion. He kept one eye fixed on the corner table, on them. The man reached across the table, his hand covering Jenna's. The touch was intimate, confident. Ryan saw how Jenna looked at him. That softness, that spark. It used to be his. He tried to shrug it off. Told himself the guy was probably some tenured art professor or a mid-level finance consultant. Whatever. Good for her. But the moment refused to fade. It nestled beneath his skin, sharp and uncomfortable, like a splinter he couldn't quite dig out. Something about the man, his stillness, his ease, unsettled Ryan in a way he couldn't name. Days later, he found himself typing her name into a search bar, a compulsion he hadn't indulged since the divorce. That's when he found it. The website for Rivers & Co. Clean. Sophisticated. The portfolio was impressive. Interiors subtly transformed by Jenna's vision, her eye. A short biography mentioned her work with private collections and bespoke installations. Ryan scoffed. "A glorified decorator," he muttered to himself. But the words rang hollow. He scrolled through the photos longer than he'd meant to, pausing over her smiling face in one candid gallery snapshot. She looked different, confident, settled, whole. But even he had to admit, it was more than he'd expected. Meanwhile, Jenna lived with a strange, persistent undercurrent of awareness. She now knew. She knew Julius wasn't just the man she loved, but the silent force behind Western Horizon Capital, Ryan's boss. The owner whose approval Ryan had been chasing blindly for years. Julius didn't know that detail mattered to her. And Jenna hadn't told him. Not because she wanted to keep secrets, but because sharing it would drag that old ugliness into the world they'd built. A calm, luminous life. She didn't want Ryan in that space, even as a ghost. And she feared, if she spoke it aloud, if she named it, it might shift something sacred between them. And somewhere deep inside, a part of her, a shadowy, quiet part, was curious. How would it all unfold? The Western Horizon Capital annual gala was approaching. In their world, it was the event of the season. Flashy, obnoxious, a temple to ego. To Ryan, it was the apex. The neurophage deal had cleared every hurdle. Only one final signature remained, that of the elusive head of Thorn Strategic Group. A formality, the board had said, a rubber stamp. The owner never showed. "This is it, Tiff," Ryan said as he adjusted his bow tie in the full-length mirror of their penthouse suite. "Tonight, this city knows who's in charge." Jenna had declined the invitation at first. "A corporate gala?" she'd said, laughing. "Julius, that's so not us. Sounds awful." He'd smiled, patient. "I know," he said. "I promise we'll stay an hour, but they've been asking me to show face for years. They think it'll boost morale." Then he added, a glint in his eyes, "And I'd rather be bored for an hour with you." "They're giving out the Dealmaker of the Year award," Julius had said, adjusting the cuffs of his tuxedo. "And I'm expected to present it. I need my brilliant partner by my side, moral support." Jenna had hesitated, but eventually relented. Still, a knot twisted deep in her stomach. Western Horizon Capital, Dealmaker of the Year. It had to be Ryan. Of course it would be Ryan. The universe wasn't just ironic. It was a savage, poetic playwright. She selected her dress with care. A midnight blue silk gown, minimalist in cut but commanding in presence. It was elegant, powerful, armor. As she looked at herself in the mirror, she barely recognized the woman staring back. This wasn't Ryan's quiet, compliant ex-wife, nor the soft-spoken art advisor. This was someone entirely new. A woman who had rebuilt herself from the ground up, who stood beside one of the most influential men in global finance. Not as decor, but as a true equal. The gala was held in the Grand Orchid Ballroom of the Fairmont, a gilded expanse of marble, crystal, and manufactured charm. The room swirled with black tuxedos, sequined gowns, and the sound of money disguised as laughter. Ryan and Vanessa stood near the entry, surrounded by a small orbit of admirers. He glowed under the praise. "A masterstroke, Callahan," bellowed Robert Mercer, the firm's CEO, clapping him hard on the shoulder. "The neurophage acquisition? That'll be in business textbooks. Croft's gonna love it." Ryan grinned, trying to be modest. "Just doing my part, sir." That's when the room shifted. The air tightened. Conversations halted mid-sentence. All eyes turned. Julius Thorn had arrived. He moved with that same quiet stillness Jenna loved. But here, in this context, it magnified. People instinctively parted as he passed. A human current parted by something vast unseen. And beside him, serene, radiant, was Jenna. Ryan's hand trembled. His champagne flute slipped from his fingers and shattered on the floor, the crash swallowed by a collective intake of breath. He stared. His brain tried to deny what his eyes screamed. There she was. Not some footnote in his past, not some afterthought, but standing at the side of the man. The phantom, the myth, the power behind everything. Jenna, the woman he had called static, the woman who had rebuilt her world in silence, had now arrived as its equal. Vanessa tightened her grip on his arm. "Ryan, who is that man?" He couldn't speak. His throat closed. Across the room, Robert Mercer began walking briskly toward the newcomers. His face transformed into something halfway between reverence and disbelief. "Mr. Thorn," he said, extending his hand, "we are deeply honored by your presence." Mr. Thorn, the name echoed in Ryan's skull. Thorn Strategic Group, the parent company, the owner, the god he never knew he'd been working for. And Jenna, the woman he discarded, stood beside him as though she'd always belonged. Ryan felt his blood run cold. That invincible feeling? Gone. In its place, a dread so heavy it rooted Ryan Callahan to the floor. The man at the restaurant, the boring professor, the background figure Jenna had looked at with such unshakable affection, wasn't some random academic. He owned them. He owned Western Horizon. He owned Ryan. And somehow, impossibly, he owned the narrative now too. The story Ryan had so carefully constructed about who won, who moved on, who mattered. Across the room, Jenna's eyes met his. Calm, steady. No malice, no smugness, just something more devastating. Understanding. In a single glance, she showed him exactly what had happened. The empire Ryan had built from the rubble of their marriage was now dust. The ballroom dimmed in his vision. The chandeliers, the muted strings of the quartet, the laughter, all distant, like echoes in a dream. It felt like drowning in elegance, suffocating beneath the very opulence that once elevated him. His whole reality shrank to the space between himself and the couple at the entrance. Jenna, dismissed, erased, forgotten. And Julius, the man holding Ryan's entire career in the palm of his hand. Julius, seemingly unaware of the tectonic shift he had triggered, gave a courteous nod to Robert Mercer, the CEO of Western Horizon. "Lovely event," he said. His voice wasn't loud, but it carried. Then his gaze shifted to Jenna. "And I believe you know my partner, Jenna Rivers." Robert turned sharply. The name hadn't registered at first. His face morphed into something between horror and disbelief. He had met Jenna before, once, twice maybe, always in passing. Ryan Callahan's wife, he had said. Quiet, polite, forgettable. Now, standing beside Julius Thorne, she might as well have been a queen. "Jenna, yes, of course." Robert stammered. How wonderful to see you." His smile twitched under the weight of confusion. Jenna's expression was elegant and unreadable. "Robert, it's been a while." Her eyes drifted past him, paused on Ryan for the briefest moment. No emotion. Then she turned back to Julius's side. And just like that, Ryan understood. She had never been a footnote. He had. The Dealmaker of the Year award ceremony wasn't a celebration, it was a funeral. Ryan had waited for this night. Had imagined it. Owned it. But now, when he stood, it was like his body didn't belong to him. Each step to the stage felt dragged through cement. The applause was scattered, the whispers louder than the clapping, and under the stage lights, the spotlight felt more like interrogation. Julius held the heavy crystal award in both hands, then approached the podium. The room went completely silent. "Good evening," Julius said, his voice composed, smooth. Western Horizon has had an exceptionally strong fiscal year, and a large part of that success can be credited to the tenacious acquisition strategy led by Mr. Ryan Callahan. He paused, let the name settle like fog, then turned toward Ryan. Not cruelly, not dramatically, just calmly. And Ryan, drenched in sweat, felt everything unravel. "The neurophage acquisition," Julius continued, choosing each word with surgical care, "has certainly been tenacious." He paused, letting the word hang in the charged air. "It was a campaign that placed victory above all else. It has, without question, added a major asset to our portfolio." For one fleeting moment, Ryan felt hope crack through the fog. Maybe it wouldn't be so bad. Maybe Julius was the kind of man who valued results, not methods. Maybe, however, Julius said. The word dropped like a blade. "At Thorne Strategic, we believe that how you win is just as important as if you win." His voice never rose. It didn't need to. "True, sustainable value is not built on scorched earth," he continued. "It is built on integrity, on foresight, on partnerships, not on hostile destruction." Julius turned back to the audience. "This particular deal, while profitable in the short term, has jeopardized relationships with key biotech innovators and opened us to long-term litigation risk due to the tactics employed. The cost of this victory, I'm afraid, may far exceed the price we paid." The message was unmistakable. This wasn't feedback. This was a public dismantling of everything Ryan believed made him successful. Julius wasn't criticizing a single deal. He was burning the entire ethos Ryan had built his career on. Recklessness, aggression, short-term wins, and he was doing it in front of everyone who mattered. Then he turned. His eyes met Ryan's, and there was something there. Not cruelty, not triumph, something quieter, harder to name. He extended the crystal award. "For your victory, Mr. Callahan." Ryan stood. He walked to the stage and took it. It felt like a tombstone in his hand. He managed a thank you, barely audible, swallowed by the heavy silence in the ballroom. Then he staggered back to his seat, his face burning. Vanessa stared at him like she didn't know who he was. Or worse, Like she was realizing exactly who he was. Disgust curled around her perfect mouth. He watched as Julius left the stage, and Jenna, beautiful, poised, joined him. Her hand slid gently onto his arm. Together, they looked like something out of a dream, like the monarchs of a realm Ryan had tried to conquer and been exiled from. The gala ended soon after. The crowd dissipated. No one approached his table. No one offered comfort. No handshake. No nod. They avoided him like he was contagious. Just an hour earlier, he was the man of the night. Now, he was nothing. The ride home was silence and distance. Vanessa sat on the opposite end of the leather seat, as far from him as the car allowed. Finally she spoke. Her voice, like the weather outside, was freezing. "So, your ex-wife is dating the man who owns your company." It wasn't a question. "I didn't know," Ryan said, barely audible. "You didn't know?" Vanessa barked a sharp, cutting laugh. "You, Ryan Callahan, the guy who prides himself on being 5 steps ahead, you missed that?" "You told me she was nobody," she continued, her voice rising. "A pathetic little art advisor and a crummy walk-up, a sad little leftover with dusty books and no ambition." "She was," he said, but his voice cracked. Desperation leaked through the words. "Clearly she wasn't," Vanessa snapped. "My God, the humiliation. Do you know what it felt like, standing in that ballroom? Everyone staring." "They weren't jealous, Ryan. They pitied me. Do you know how that feels?" She shivered with disgust. "Being married to the man whose ex-wife is sleeping with his boss. How do I even show my face at the club tomorrow?" Ryan said nothing. He could feel the laughter of that crowd reverberating through his skull. 1,000 mental echoes mocking his ambition. Each step he'd taken felt suddenly absurd. He was hollow, a walking echo of the man who had left their penthouse that evening. He looked into the mirror that morning and didn't recognize the gaunt face staring back. Eyes sunken not from hard work, but from the weight of failure. His kingdom? A house of cards. And Jenna? She was the hurricane. He knew, with an ice-cold certainty, that his career at Western Horizon was over. Julius didn't need to fire him. He had simply revealed him. The system would finish the job. In the days after, he felt the walls closing in, emails unanswered, meeting requests ignored, phone calls routed to assistants. Every omission marked him as an afterthought. He'd be iced out, his projects reassigned, his influence diminished, and eventually someone would hand him a polite resignation letter and say it was time for a transition. He remembered Jenna's face, not angry, not triumphant. Worse, it was indifferent. Her calm acceptance was a punch he couldn't dodge. The woman he once nearly worshipped now looked at him as if he no longer existed. He didn't matter to her anymore. He wasn't her villain. He wasn't even her story. He was obsolete. That was the real power play. Not revenge, oblivion. On Monday, the office felt like a funeral. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. Phones rang unanswered. Colleagues with eyes averted passed him in the hallway. It was as though he had become invisible, an erased memory once central to the firm's identity. People didn't make eye contact. Those who did only offered tight smiles, thin with pity. Robert Mercer, once his strongest advocate, summoned him to the corner office. No handshake, no seat offered. "Ryan," he began, already shaking his head, "we're going to restructure leadership on the neurophage integration. Given Mr. Thorne's feedback, we'll need to take the project in a different direction." Ryan didn't respond. He didn't need to. The room was thick with the truth. In that moment, Ryan felt his final tether to the life he had known snap. He had already lost. "A more diplomatic touch?" Ryan asked, each word brittle on his tongue. "You're taking me off my own deal?" "It's not your deal anymore, Ryan," Robert Mercer said evenly. "It's the firm's, and the firm needs to protect its relationship with its owner." Robert didn't blink. "Your other projects will be reassigned too, effective immediately." Ryan's stomach dropped. "We'll need you to step back for a while. Focus on internal strategy." Internal strategy. Corporate exile. A quiet corner office. No windows. No decisions. No relevance. Just a soft, slow death. They weren't firing him. They were leaving the door open and hoping he'd take the hint. Vanessa didn't wait for the dust to settle. She packed up and left within the week. No goodbyes. No tears. Just a single note, left on the kitchen island in her flowing script. "I can't be associated with this kind of failure. My lawyer will be in touch." She even took that painting, the one Jenna had left behind, the one she once dismissed as drab. Now Ryan was alone. in the sterile condo he used to flaunt. The silence that once meant control now felt like punishment. The view, his prized skyline, didn't inspire awe anymore. Just vertigo. He was a ghost, haunting the ruins of his own empire. A month after the gala, his phone rang. Unlisted number. "Hello?" he answered, voice flat. "Ryan, it's Jenna." His heart slammed into his ribs. "Jenna? What do you want?" "I'm at our old coffee shop, the one near campus. I found something of yours. I'd like to return it." Her voice was calm, cool, not cold, but detached. It wasn't a question. He didn't know why he went. Curiosity? Self-destruction? One last look at the wreckage? She was seated at the back table, a cup of coffee warming her hands. Peaceful, serene. She gestured for him to sit. He did. "I didn't plan any of this," she said softly, eyes on her drink. "I didn't know who Julius was, not like that, until weeks before the gala." She paused. "I never wanted to hurt you." "You could have warned me," he choked out, voice dry. She finally looked at him, her gaze steady and unflinching. "Because you could have used it," she said simply. "You might have tried to manipulate the situation, to turn my relationship with him into leverage." She tilted her head slightly. "The Ryan I knew would have done that. The man who once told me I was the weight holding him back would have seen this as an opportunity." He winced. It landed like a punch. The memory of those words, the way he tossed them off as casual truth, rose like bile in his throat. "I'm not here to gloat," she said. "I came because I'm closing this chapter of my life, and I don't want to leave any loose ends." She slid a small velvet box across the table. Inside was the simple, elegant engagement ring he'd given her 15 years ago. He remembered telling her during the divorce, coldly, to sell it, that she'd need the cash. The sight of it now, unbent, gleaming in soft light, felt like a window into a time before everything corroded. Before he had broken something that couldn't be repaired. "Julius isn't a vengeful man," she said. "He's a builder. He doesn't enjoy tearing things down. What he said at the gala, that was business. It was his professional opinion of your work." "It felt personal," Ryan muttered. "I know," Jenna said, a faint note of sympathy softening her voice. "Because for you, everything is personal. Your job, your money, your title, that's all you are." Her words weren't cruel. They were just honest. The kind of truth that burns cleaner than rage. "But for me," she continued, "it was always about us, the partnership. When you walked away from that, you didn't just leave me. You destroyed the very foundation of your own life. You've been falling ever since. You just didn't notice." He blinked, and in that silence he felt it. The emptiness at the center of his world. The hollow echo of everything he thought mattered. She stood, pulling on her coat. "Julius has launched a philanthropic division. The Thorn Foundation," she said. "He's asked me to lead the arts and culture arm. I'll be endowing museums, funding scholarships, supporting young artists." She smiled gently. "Turns out my quiet little life and my supposed lack of drive just needed the right soil to grow." She looked at him one last time, not with pity, but with farewell. "Goodbye, Ryan," she said. "I hope next time you build something real." And then she turned and walked out, leaving him alone with the memory of who they once were, and the ruin of who he had become. He looked down at the ring, that perfect, unbroken circle, a symbol of a promise he'd shattered. The metal was cool in his palm, but the shame burned hot under his skin. And for the first time in his adult life, Ryan Callahan wept. Not for the job, not for the condo, not for Vanessa, but for her, for the only real thing he had ever possessed, the love of a good woman, a love he'd been too blind, too arrogant to deserve. A final, quiet step in a long, unrelenting fall from grace. Once, his name was synonymous with cutthroat success. Now, it was radioactive. No major firm would touch him. His downfall had become legend, a cautionary tale told over power lunches he no longer attended. The penthouse was sold to cover the mountain of debt, Vanessa's tastes, his own excesses. The Tom Ford suits, gone. The sports car repossessed. Eventually Ryan Callahan resurfaced, 2 time zones away, in a city known more for practicality than ambition. He was a senior analyst now, at a mid-market logistics firm, a company that moved boxes. Literal, heavy boxes, not money, not power, just freight. He lived in a bland 2-bedroom apartment in a massive complex called Oak Haven Meadows. His balcony overlooked a communal swimming pool, empty 6 months a year. The silence of the old condo had been suffocating. But this new world? It was loud in all the wrong ways. Thin walls meant constant company. Crying infants, bickering couples, the thump of teenage bass lines. There was no prestige here. No curated image, no throne. At the grocery store, he was just another guy in line. At the office, just the new guy from out of town. No one feared him. No one envied him. No one cared. Stripped of title, influence, and identity, Ryan was finally alone with the only thing he'd never examined, himself. And he didn't like the company. Sometimes at night, he'd sit in the dark. The velvet box still sat on the coffee table, Jenna's ring inside. He would trace its perfect circle with a trembling finger. From that first spark of young love in a college dorm, to this, a life defined by acquiring. And in the end, all he had left was loss. The long, slow work of rebuilding a self, not a fortune, had begun. Painful, lonely, but necessary. Meanwhile, in a sun-drenched corner office overlooking Central Park, Jenna Thorne signed off on the final grant of the quarter. Her new name, adopted quietly without fanfare, was now etched on every letterhead, every scholarship, every gallery fund she approved. The wedding in the Tuscan countryside didn't feel like a pivot. It felt like a fulfillment. 20 guests, a simple linen gown, vows whispered beneath a centuries-old olive tree as the sun dipped behind the rolling hills. No orchestras, no photographers, just peace. Their honeymoon was a quiet pilgrimage through forgotten villages, visiting obscure chapels, chasing the faded colors of lost frescoes. It was joy, gentle, earnest, real. As the director of the Thorne Foundation's Arts and Culture Division, Jenna Thorne had become one of the most influential voices in her field. She didn't just write checks, she built futures. She launched the first Brush Grant, supporting young artists from low-income communities with mentorship, funding, and studio space. Her current passion project? Restoring and digitizing the archives of an overlooked surrealist painter from the 1930s, whose brilliance had been buried beneath the reputations of louder, lesser men. Jenna wasn't just curating collections anymore. She was rewriting history, giving voice to the silenced, bringing brilliance back to light. The quiet little life she had once been mocked for, it had bloomed into a legacy. Her life with Julius was a portrait of balance, painted in soft strokes, not headlines. He sought her counsel, not just on art, but on people, on empathy, on meaning. Her insight became his compass. They weren't power-hungry, they were power-aware. Evenings were not black-tie galas, but warm dinners at home, spirited debates over unknown artists, books read aloud in bed, meals cooked with quiet affection in their sunlit kitchen. They weren't building an empire. They were building a home. One evening, after a gallery opening, they strolled under the city lights. Julius slipped her hand into his arm. "Do you ever think of him?" he asked gently. Jenna didn't respond right away. Her eyes watched the blur of headlights and neon. "Sometimes," she admitted, "not with anger, just a quiet sadness. I think of him like a character in a novel I read long ago, a man so terrified of being ordinary that he never learned how to be truly extraordinary." He thought value lived on spreadsheets. She looked up at Julius, this man who owned so much of the world, yet moved through it with the grace of someone simply grateful to be here. "He never understood," she finished, "that the most valuable things in life can't be bought." She rested her head on his shoulder, at peace. Her past, a fading shoreline. Her future, a vast, sunlit horizon. She rarely thought of Ryan Callahan, but when she did, it was with distant sorrow. For a man who had once held a masterpiece and traded it for something cheap and hollow, only realizing what he'd lost when it was hanging in someone else's gallery, adored by the world he had tried and failed to conquer. Because this wasn't a story about revenge, it was the quiet triumph of rightness, karma, delivered not in rage, but in clarity. It was the story of a woman rediscovering her immense, inherent worth, while the man who discarded her was forced to learn the brutal truth that price and value are not the same. Ryan Callahan chased everything shiny, everything hollow, and in doing so, lost the one thing of true substance, Jenna. Her victory wasn't in beating him. It wasn't revenge. It was revelation. She was never supposed to play in his game, because she'd been building a different game all along, one with integrity, with purpose, with grace. So the story is over. Our wonderful friends, are you still here at this hour? If you are, then maybe something in this tale touched your heart in a way you didn't expect. You know, Ryan Callahan's story isn't just about downfall, and Jenna's? It isn't just about success. This story is about awakening. It's about those quiet moments after the chaos, the ones where you look around and ask, who am I, really, when the noise stops? Ryan had everything that sparkled, but it was empty. Jenna had everything that was overlooked and turned it into legacy. And maybe that's the lesson here. That success isn't loud. It's not in the applause, the awards, or the power. It's in peace. It's in knowing you are living a life that aligns with your truth, even if the world doesn't clap for it. As author Anne Lamott once wrote, almost everything will work again if you unplug it for a few minutes, including you. That's Jenna's story, unplugging from what wasn't real, finding breath again, finding meaning again. And for those of you who've ever felt dismissed, underestimated, or told you were too quiet, not enough, or not driven enough, let this story remind you. Your worth is not up for debate. Your value isn't defined by someone else's lack of vision. So maybe now it's time to ask ourselves, what am I building? Is it real? Or is it just loud? If you felt something tonight, even just a flicker, go ahead, like, share, and subscribe. Because stories like this, they find the ones who need them most. Maybe tonight, that was you. And if no one's told you lately, you are not a footnote in someone else's story. You are the author of your own. See you in the next one.